It is a dark and sordid chapter in Canada's history. Canada's residential school system saw an estimated 150,000 First Nations, Inuit and Métis children taken from their families. We welcome Arthur Manuel here. He, along with two of his siblings, was sent to the Kamloops Indian Residential School. He's also the co-author of Unsettling Canada, a national wake-up call. And Arthur, I just want to get, let's tell your story. How old were you when you entered the Kamloops Indian Residential School?
Oh, as a young person, I think grade 8 or so, I guess.
Grade 8?
Yeah.
So maybe 13 years old?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
Why'd you end up going there?
Oh, my father was, had to go and do some training, George Manuel, on becoming a community development worker. So he had to go to Laval University, and there was nobody to take care of us because my mother was in a hospital, so we wound up having to go to residential school.
Did your father tell you about his experience with residential schools?
Oh yeah, he knew about it. You know, he was actually crippled in the very same residential school.
So why would he send you there?
Well, it's just the way of the economics, I guess. There were just no other mechanisms to deal with it. He was busy working on the politics of building up the Indian community. In those days, there was no programs and services for Indigenous people. It was a pretty rough area, and he was working on that. And that's I guess the way the cards were dealt for us.
Now, your sister Arlene was there?
Arlene and
your brother Richard. They both went.
Yep.
Were the three of you able to sort of look out for each other in that setting?
No, you don't talk to each other in that setting because the boys and girls don't mix at all. There's one side of the building is the girls and one side of the boys, and then in the boys there's junior boys, intermediate boys and senior boys, and he was a junior boy, and junior and intermediates never mixed.
Didn't mix. In your book, Unsettling Canada, you do discuss this experience, and I want to read an excerpt from it here. You say, "I did not suffer any extreme abuse, nothing like the terrible legacy of physical and, as we have all heard, sexual abuse that was suffered by many. But even without this extreme abuse, I remember the residential school experience as a time of great loneliness and alienation. The schools are cold places to spend your youth, and the staff work diligently to reinforce in us a sense that in Canadian society, we were the bottom of the heap and were powerless to resist." Do you wonder if, because so many stark, awful stories have come out from the residential school experience, that perhaps people who had the experience that you have had, not as dramatic, thankfully, gets short shrift in the whole history of this thing?
I think, even though, like I say in the book, is that I myself never experienced anything, but I did witness some children being beaten and stuff like that, and it really does shake your confidence as a person, being in an institution like that. Mostly because it really alienates you from your home community, and you develop your own mind of thinking, which is kind of funny because I meet people from residential school, and there's not like a reunion, like you have your reunions, like people graduate and then they go back years later and they all look at each other, and
you don't do that, eh?
You don't really do that.
No.
And when you run into people, like I just ran into a guy at my band. He showed up there playing bass guitar or something like that, and I ran into him and I recognized him, and we had a brief talk about it, but we were actually good friends in residential school. So
but you don't quite share the happy memories.
No, you don't really go through that.
How do you think you got over the negative impact and alienation of that experience?
Well, I think I was just pretty independent-minded, just generally speaking. So I got through it fairly well. I think I remember it, though it's part of my history. I actually wound up going to 3 residential schools. I went to Kamloops Indian Residential School, and then St. Eugene's, and Cranbrook, and St. Mary's, and in Mission, BC. So they're all run by the Oblate Fathers and the Sisters of St. Ian's. Yeah.
Do you think there are any, to this day, lingering effects that you experience because of this?
Not really, but it's one of the things that I know people who, the other day I was just talking to one of the hereditary chiefs from Upper Nicola, and we were going through a list of people who committed suicide, didn't live, and you know, we went through close to 15 or 16 people that we knew of that from St. Mary's, from the one in Mission. But it was sad because a lot of them led, a lot of our fellow students led some pretty dismal lives because residential school obviously didn't prepare them for anything.
Sure.
You know.
Stephen Harper, as we remember, made a prominent apology for the residential schools crisis in the House of Commons on behalf of the Government of Canada. Here's what Thomas King, the writer, had to say about that. He said, "An apology without any action behind it is an empty apology and was simply a bit of ceremony, a bit of theater, just aping for the cameras. And I'm afraid that really is what it looks like it was. It was just PR and little more than that." Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. I know people in terms of child welfare today that it's just as bad, you know, in terms of taking them away for foster homes and stuff like that. And it hasn't really changed. When you talk about people having 0.2% of the land, one of the consequences, and when I say that, this is the size of Indian reserves in Canada, when you add them all up with 0.2%, there's no economic base there to build a future for your family in that. And I've been on Indian reserves in the United States where they've been basically self-sufficient. They're that large, you know. And that in Canada is not happening. And as long as that doesn't happen, you're going to wind up with children being taken away. That's the consequence of that, you know.
So symbolically, did the apology mean anything to you?
No, it didn't mean anything. It doesn't at all. I don't consider it an apology to me, that's for sure.
So what do you think the Government of Canada still needs to do for that apology to have teeth?
I think I need to deal with the land rights of Indigenous people. It has to get Indigenous people independent again and not dependent.
So get some of those land claims settled.
Settled, yes. I think that's the primary goal.
One government initiative in this area has been what's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I know you know all about it, and it had this to say in its interim report. The report says reconciliation implies relationship. The residential schools badly damaged relationships within Aboriginal families and communities, between Aboriginal peoples and churches, between Aboriginal peoples and the government, and between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples within Canadian society. That's a lot of relationship rebuilding that needs to happen. What's going to be the toughest part of all of that?
I think it's going to be the government changing its fundamental approach to its relationship with Indigenous people, because right now they under the Canadian Constitution, for instance, the Section 9124 says that the federal government's responsible for Indians and lands reserved for Indians. That's the most colonial piece of garbage that you can run across on this planet. You know, like where Native people have no right to govern ourselves, period. You know, that's what that says. The federal government is responsible for Indians, and that's me, because I'm considered an Indian, and the land's reserved for this Indian, you know, which means that I don't have the right and responsibility to deal with it. How am I supposed to deal with my kids if I can't take care of myself, and I can't take care of the land and resources that belong to me? You know, it just doesn't work out that way. So that has to change. And those are the framework relationships that I'm talking about. That has to change. You know, they have to recognize Section 35(1), the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of Indigenous people, that we do have a right, underlying title to our land. We do have a right to gain sustenance from our territories and not be locked into that 0.2%, that kind of thing.
In your view, does it matter which political party is in the Prime Minister's office, or are they all just the same?
They're all the same, because I haven't seen any government that's really talking about self-determination, recognition Aboriginal treaty rights on the ground. I just have not seen that. They have different, I guess, approaches. Some a little hard, like the Harper, you know, toe the line or we cut off your funds. And the Liberals are a little smoother, but the effect is still the same.
Well, you say a little smoother. I mean, you're from British Columbia, so the Kelowna Accord that was negotiated by Paul Martin's government, a lot of people observed that as an important step forward. Did you?
No, we were actually outside demonstrating against that.
Demonstrating against it?
Yeah.
How come?
Well, we just felt that the responsibility of programs and services is a federal responsibility. I don't know if you know that it was only in 1962 that the feds and provinces met on programs and services, and they got in a big fight as to who was responsible for it. The feds said the province was responsible for because of the subject matter of the issue, and then the provinces said no because it's the Indian Reserve. The feds are responsible. I think programs and services on Indian reserves are less than which are available for provincial and other Canadians in other areas. So the thing is that we fall through the cracks. So the thing is, I didn't agree with that conference because it wasn't going to address any of those, and I felt that the land issue should be the primary issue, and it was sort of allowing the government to sneak around dealing with the more fundamental issues.
Gotcha. Arthur, it's good of you to come into TVO tonight and share your views with us. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.